I'm writing this because my sister made me promise I'd get it out of my head, and she is the only one I've told. And she said write it down like a letter and send it somewhere, even if I never mail it. So this is that letter. If you can't use it, fine. I just need it to exist somewhere that isn't me. My name is Danny Hale. 3 winters ago, I worked the deck of a freighter out of Seattle, the Marguerite, hauling lumber up through the Bering Sea. We lost power in a November storm and went down fast. I was in the water before I understood what the water was doing. The second engineer made it into the raft with me and lasted 2 days. I won't write about that part. After he went over the side, I had a leaking raft and no radio and a wind that didn't stop. I bailed with my boots. I remember the bailing, and the gray, and my hands turning into something that didn't belong to me anymore. On the 2nd or 3rd day, I lay down in the bottom of the raft and thought about my sister's wedding, which I was going to miss. That is when I saw the island. It isn't on the charts. I checked after. I looked at a lot of charts, and I know how that sounds. But I saw it. Low, gray, a scratch of trees up the spine. I beached the raft, crawled above the tide line, and slept where I fell. I woke up to a village, 40 houses, maybe, gray wood, a dock, a white steeple peeling paint, nets and smoke. It could have been any small town on the coast of Alaska, and I remember thinking, thank God, and getting up and walking toward it with my hands open. The first person to see me was a kid carrying a bucket of fish guts. He looked at me for 1 full second, then he dropped the bucket and ran screaming. A woman came to a doorway, saw me, went back inside, and I heard the lock click, not a slam. A lock click. I stood in the middle of the road with my hands up, saying my name, saying I was shipwrecked, saying please. Nobody came out. But the houses were watching me, curtains moving. That particular silence a whole street makes when everyone inside has gone still at once. For a long time, no one came out. Then an old woman came to the door of the house nearest the dock and put a bowl of fish stew on the step. She looked at me the way you look at a stray dog or at a thing that might bite. Then she went back inside and shut the door. I ate the stew sitting on the ground with my back against a piling. I was too far gone to care what it meant. That night I slept under the raft, wrapped in a tarp that smelled of bait. The bowls kept coming, stew, then bread, then a jar of water. Always at a distance, always from the same old woman who never came closer than the length of the yard. I tried to talk to her. She didn't answer. I tried to follow a man down to the dock. He walked faster, and 2 other men stepped between us, and they didn't touch me. They just stood there facing me like a wall, until I backed up. I told myself it was quarantine, that they thought I was diseased or cursed, or that a man who washes up alone from a wreck carries bad luck with him. You tell yourself the same thing. Anybody would. On the 3rd day, the old woman left a mirror on the grass at the edge of the yard, with a piece of cloth folded beside it. I picked the mirror up and looked. My face was the face I knew, beaten up, sunburned, scabbed, but mine. I checked for a rash, a wound, anything that would explain the screaming. There was nothing. And slowly it came to me that the mirror wasn't for me to check myself. It was for them, so they could be sure I was still wearing it, that I hadn't changed. I want to be careful here, because this is the part I've never been able to explain, and I don't expect to explain it to you either. The people on that island were not wrong about what they saw. That is the whole thing. They looked at my face and their stomachs turned. I looked at theirs and felt the same. It wasn't a lie on either side. It was flipped. Like a photograph, printed backward. The proof was Marin. She was the only person on the island who didn't flinch when she looked at me. Her house stood at the far end of the village with the door left open, and she was the one who carried the stew. The old woman was her grandmother, or her great-aunt. I never got it straight. Marin was maybe 22. She had the closest thing to a normal face I saw in that village, and that was the worst thing a face could be there. She knew a few words of English, learned from the supply boat, from radio, from somewhere. She said her name. Then she pointed at my face and said, Wrong. Then she pointed at her own face and said, wrong. And she laughed, not cruel, tired, and said both wrong, island wrong. That is as close as anyone ever came to explaining it to me. That was my first real look at where I was. The women on the street looked at Maren the way they looked at me, like something to be pitied from a safe distance. Maren was at the bottom of that place, and she was there because her face was the one I could stand to look at. I got the shape of it then, the whole backward economics of it, even if I couldn't have said it in words. Winter came. The days went gray and short. I was living in a net shed by then, in borrowed clothes, eating their food, and I could feel the cold the way you feel a debt. The old woman's stew wasn't going to carry me through February. I tried to say this to Maren, and she did something I'll never forget. She squatted by the stove, scooped a handful of ash, and rubbed it over her own face. Then she pointed at me. Then at the cloth she'd brought. I stood there with ash on my hands and the smell of the stove in my nose, and I thought about it the way you think about putting on a costume. It comes off. It washes off. There was a bucket of seawater by the door of the shed, and every morning that winter I scrubbed my arm with it, hard until the skin came up pink, just to prove to myself I still had the same skin underneath. That is the part I want you to understand. I checked every single day. It always washed off, and it worked. That is the sick part. It worked. I blackened my face and wrapped my head the way Maren showed me, and the island changed. People nodded. A man gave me work hauling nets. I got a shed with a stove and a real door. The old woman stopped leaving bowls on the step and started handing them to me. And once, from the door of the church, someone said something that might have been a blessing. The first time I saw the most beautiful person on the island, I was standing on the dock with a load of line over my shoulder. He came down the path with 2 men behind him, and everybody on the dock went still and respectful. The way you'd stand for a flag, his face was a map of old burns and knife work. The features were gone, folded over on themselves, and the skin had healed in ridges. His eyes were the only part that still looked like a person's eyes, and they were the clearest eyes I've ever seen. He stopped and looked at me for a long moment. I could feel it, standing there with ash on my face, that he was seeing something in me that made him almost sorry. That was the only time I saw pity on that island, and it was coming from a man whose face I couldn't look at for more than a second. I learned, in pieces, how it worked. Maren's fragments, the way people stood, the way the best boat in the harbor was never touched by anyone but the beautiful. There was one boat that could run the open water, the only one big enough to reach the mainland, and it belonged, in practice, to the man with the folded face and the 2 men behind him. The supply boat came once before the weather closed in. I stood at the end of the dock and waved. Nobody on the supply boat looked at me. The men on the dock turned me around and walked me back to the village. Not rough, just certain. My face wasn't finished. I wasn't allowed to leave. That was the week I started thinking about the scar. Maren told me about it the way you tell a child about a hard thing, gently, so they don't run from it. One cut, a real one, the kind that heals white. The man with the folded face had been offered the same cut once when he was young, and he'd taken it, and then another, and the island had opened for him. Not so much, Maren said. 1, then boat. She drew a line from the corner of her mouth to her jaw with her finger. This much. Then you go home. For a week I watched the man with the folded face, the way a man watches a machine he is about to climb into. I ran the line with my finger along my own jaw in the dark, practicing. I'd seen him survive it, and more than survive. He was the most respected person on the island. 1 cut, a scar, and the boat. It is the kind of trade anybody makes. The ash comes off every morning. The scar would be no different, just permanent, which was the point. The night before I decided, Maren took me down to the reef. It was low tide, later than I'd ever been up. The water was flat and black, and the moon was behind the clouds, and I could see lights. Under the water, out past the reef, a string of lights, like a market. Not reflections, lights moving. Marin stood beside me and didn't say anything for a long time. Then she said, "They know your face there." I looked. Figures under the water, or in it, standing the way a crowd stands at a fair. All of them facing toward me, all of them looking at my face the way the man on the dock had looked at his best boat. Like I was something precious, like I was the most beautiful thing they'd seen. "They keep you," Marin said. "They keep you. You stay." I ran. I didn't look back until I was at the top of the beach. And when I did, the lights were still there, patient, under the water. I understood two things that night, standing in the dark with my heart going like a drum. The first was that the island wasn't wrong, and it wasn't sick, and it wasn't a mistake. It was just a place where the looking was backwards, and I'd been standing in it long enough that I was starting to look backwards too. The second was that the sea market wasn't an escape. It was the same cage turned around. In the water I'd be the treasure. On the island I was the thing they couldn't look at. Either way, I wasn't a person with a face of my own anymore. The next morning I looked at myself in a bucket of still water, and for the first time I didn't recognize the face in it as mine. Not because it had changed, because I was looking at it the way they looked at faces, as a thing that needed to be more beautiful, more finished, more ruined. I walked to Marin's house and asked her to make the cut. She did it with a filleting knife. Clean, the way someone who'd done it before does. It hurt more than I want to write about. She packed it with ash and wrapped it and told me not to pick at it. And I sat in the shed with the stove going and watched the winter light come up gray through the window. And I thought, it is just a scar. It heals. I can still leave. They gave me the boat that week. I took it out past the reef on the first clear night, when the moon was up and the water was running flat. Nobody stopped me. I don't know if that means they let me go or if they thought I'd come back. I didn't. I sailed, then motored, then sailed. And on the fourth day a crabber picked me up off the Aleutians, half dead, with a scar on my face, and no story I could tell that made any sense. I was in the hospital in Dutch Harbor for 2 weeks. I called my sister from a payphone. She cried. I told her the boat sank and I washed up somewhere and a fishing village took me in, which was true, and that I'd hurt my face in the wreck, which was also true. I've been home 4 months now. I've looked at a lot of charts. I keep the ash in a tin on the top shelf of the bathroom cabinet. I don't open it and I don't throw it out. My sister asked about the scar once, and I told her it was fishing line, and she knew I was lying, and she let it go. She got married last summer. I stood at the back of the church. It was fine. I just kept my eyes on the floor. I'm standing at the bathroom mirror now. The razor is in my hand. The scar runs from the corner of my mouth to my jaw, healed white, and I'm looking at my face the way they taught me to look at a face, and I can't tell anymore if it is ugly enough.